I'm going to give you a few minutes summary, just really a couple of minutes. So basically how we started in 2b is the Tana of the Mishnah said that the right time to do the Shema, to actually begin, your earliest time, is from the time that Kohanim who were Tameh in a state of impurity may enter to eat their teruma, which quite simply meant they had to go in a mikveh during the day, and in the evening when 3 stars were out, they were able to eat the crop that Israel brought for them to consume. But meat sacrifices had to wait for the next day before they could partake of them when the sun had already risen. And we learned from there that the earliest time that you can do the Shema is when 3 stars come out. And it says, why did you bring the issue of the Kohen up? Well, quite simply, is that we learned this rule that they were eligible to eat the truma once that time had passed, and they were already in the mikveh, but they couldn't eat it after the mikveh during daylight. So it said you learn from there the 3 stars. We learned from earliest time for Shema is the 3 stars. We also learned in the Mishnah the latest time that a Kohen can consume the sacrificial offerings is midnight. The sages say generally the latest time for Shema is midnight. If you eat it into dawn, you could get kares. You miss the opportunity of the mitzvah of Shema if you wait until dawn. Rabban Gamliel said to his son, under an emergency of a wedding, said to his kids, if you haven't done it, you can do it. But generally agrees with the sages is not to leave it to the last minute in case you fall asleep. And we say, okay, so how do we know the earliest time to say the Shema? In our Mishnah, let's just bring our Mishnah. Fine. Are there any other sources? And we say, yes, in fact, there are. There were 3 brises. So let's just bring on the first one and we look at it. And it's contrasting opinion because our brisa turns around and says that the earliest one may recite the Shema is from when a poor person enters to eat his bread with salt. And Tosfot turned around and said this term enters to eat his bread with salt actually is relevant because while he enters and his family prepares a simple meal for him, he still has time to do the Shema and the Amidah for the afternoon prayer beforehand. It also states that the latest time that he can do Shema is when he gets up from leave from his meal. So the issue is that as far as if the latest time is when he gets up from his meal, that clearly is the earliest time, and none of the opinions say that that's the latest time. It seems far-fetched. It doesn't even agree with any of the opinions in the Mishnah. Not Rav Eliezer said you can do it up to the first watch, end of the first watch. And Gavin Stoller said a good point is that, like how does that difference work? And we said the difference works in winter when the sun sets earlier, and therefore the first watch could be like 10 p.m. as opposed to midnight, so it might make a 2 or 3 hour difference. In summer, not so much. And then obviously you got midnight and until dawn. So if it's from when the poor person takes leave from his meal, and that's the latest time, it doesn't agree. So the Gemara says, look, put that latest time aside for now in the argument. Let's just see when the time starts. And the time that starts is from he enters to eat his food. And then by that stage, he will have already, while his family is preparing a simple meal, will have already done Shema and Amidah. Okay. So when we looked at that, we say, look, that seems to dispute our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is saying, obviously, when a Kohen who is Tameh is permitted to eat his teruma, it's clearly because by logical deduction, Lawrence was a bit irritated, and he was quite rightly irritated. He said, but they can't really be the same time, because our logic extended to the fact that, firstly, his meal's rather simple to prepare. It's not like a normal person that has the funding to buy meat. and that can take an expense and hours to cook, and the cost involved in cooking and fuel is heavy, and he might not even have candles for illumination to eat in the dark. So it definitely seems way earlier. And that would seem to contradict our Mishnah, which says the later time when three small stars come out. So that's what it seems. And the question is, does it in fact argue with our Mishnah, the Brisa? And what did we say last night, guys, and why? Any of you guys can answer that. What did we say? Is it in fact a dispute? And if so, why? And if not, why? That first Brisa.
Well, we don't know the actual. It might be a dispute. We don't know. It might not be. We don't know the exact definition. We don't know the exact timings. We don't know exactly when that earliest time is, or when he returns. We said he might come back from work this probably even later than the average guy because he needs longer hours. So we don't know exactly what that time is. So at this stage, we don't have the correct definitions for these things. We don't have the definition for when Shabbos starts, when we know that we eat a bit earlier on Shabbos as well because the food gets cold, but what is that earliest time? So at this stage, without the correct definitions, we don't know if they in agreement, or if they contrast each other. We're not sure.
Exactly. So that's what the Gemara says, exactly that, saying, listen, at this stage, you could logically think that the poor person eats earlier and it would contrast. But we don't have any evidence. And the Gemara is saying, well, what do you mean we don't have evidence? And the clear thing of it is, no, we're logically deducing that they probably eat earlier because they don't have the funding to buy expensive meat to cook, to even see by nighttime without candles, and that's expensive. So it's an assumption. But on an evidential portfolio base, the only thing that the Bryce has said is when we do the Shmos, when poor people enter to eat their meal. So that doesn't contrast with our Mishnah because there's not two opinions in the first brisa of another opinion saying, well, it's when the Kohen are after mikvah in a state to eat their teruma after sunset. There's no indication. It could be the same time as Gavin said. It could be contrasting. We don't have enough evidence. So the Gemara says, well, we don't know. So therefore, it's not necessarily incompatible. And since the logic of the Gemara is to put a Mishnah more important than a Bryce, it said, we're not going to throw out the Mishnah. So far, we don't have enough evidence on the first Bryce as to whether or not it's contradictory or complementary. We don't know. So we can say it could be the same time. We don't know. So Gavin, that was excellent. That's exactly it. So the Gemara says, listen, we have to challenge this somewhat because we've got two other Bryces. Now there's another opinion which brings and this is a second Bryce. It's important not to confuse it with the first. And that is according to Rabbi Meir, we do the evening Shema from the time that people enter to eat their bread on Shabbat Eve. Okay? And the sages say from the time that Kohanim who are Tameh are entitled to eat their teruma again. And the sound for this is the appearance of the stars, and it goes off on a bit of a tangent, and it talks about temple workers, and it brings from obviously Nehemiah chapter 4 verse 15, and it says, so we did the work with half of them grasping the spears from the rising of dawn until the appearance of the stars. And it further adds, and the night was for us a watch and a day. And it says, well, why did it have to do that addition? Because it's saying that at the end of the day, you might think their work week is a bit longer than average. They end their work when the stars come out. It's way after sunset. And they start their day when dawn begins. It's not even when sun rises. It's when you've got a peak of light. So therefore, you can't compare this to a normal halachic working day, you would think. But the Gemara says because it added that last sentence, it generally states that people had a very long working day, especially the majority of the workers, unless they were in a very, very good financial position and they were the exception rather than the rule. And since that's a work day, this is proof that the appearance of the stars would, by the way, that never appeared in our Mishnah, the appearance of the stars. We just learned in our Mishnah it was the same time that the Kohen are entitled to eat their teruma, where we know it's when the three stars come out, but this Brisa actually corroborates it. So the sages in Brisa and the sages in our Mishnah are on the same page. What is a contradicting opinion? Rabbi Meir, who turns around and says from the time that people enter to eat their bread on the Sabbath. Okay, so far, what's the problem, Gavin? Well, Lance, I know others at the pharmacy. If you, Lance, you can't answer, I understand you're in the middle of something. If you can, be lovely to have your intervention.
So I just had a quick question.
Cool.
You had just spoken about using the Kohanim. What after they've gone to the mikveh, then they can have their truma based on the three stars. But I thought that the reason they mentioned the Kohanim is because they needed a space to slot them in. So I don't know if you can see where I'm getting. So I thought that there was no space where anywhere else where they had to put the Kohanim in here, because normally they had nothing to do with this topic, but they're mentioning them here to bring it in. So with the Kohanim, they specifically mentioned three stars. I'm not sure. I thought the three stars is based on this current Mishnah dealing with when you say the Shema.
Okay, so Lance, let me just see if I understand your question. You're saying you're a little bit surprised that this is the first mention of the three stars because you thought it was implicit in the Mishnah because of the Gemara's first question. And Lance is right. The Gemara's first question is very simple. It said, why did it go off on a tangent and mention the Kohanim? You could have just said in the Mishnah that you can begin reciting the Shema when the appearance of three small stars is seen. So to answer Lance's question is, firstly, it went off to teach us another principle about the Kohanim, is that that's when they can eat their teruma. So it teaches you about the Kohanim, and why it is implicit when three stars come out is, ironically, when you learn about the Kohanim, we learn from the Brisa, in fact, that that's when three stars come out. In other words, it's all linked, and that's why this Brisa is mentioned, is that if it's all linked, we can't just throw that Brisa away. It's not mentioned. What the Gemara is saying is in the Mishnah, it could have just turned around and said different words. It could have said when three small stars appear, that's when you start Shema. It in fact mentioned when the Kohen were entitled to eat the teruma. So, from there, we learn it's when three stars come out. But how do we know it's when three stars come out when the Kohanim are entitled to eat their teruma? Lance, from this exact brisa, from the second brisa, we learn it. And that's why the Gemara is bringing it as evidence, because it's saying, well, fine, the Mishnah and the brisa agree, but what do we do with Rabbi Meir's opinion about that the earliest time for people doing Shema is when they eat their bread on Shabbat evening? That's the question of the Gemara. So the Brisa and the Mishnah have interlocked each other like the whole of Shas. In the beginning, we just don't know what to do with Rabbi Meir's opinion, because the first Brisa doesn't contradict the Mishnah. It just says, well, the time that we can do Shema is when the poor people enter to eat their meal. So we're saying, well, it seems earlier, and therefore it might be a contradiction. And it says, logically, it would seem to be a contradiction, but we don't have another opinion in that first brisa, so therefore it could be compatible with when the Kohanim are entitled to eat their teruma. We don't know. Now, problem comes with the second brisa, because the second brisa was already put at a divergent opinion, and that divergent opinion is when you are eligible to eat your bread on Shabbat Eve. So then this conclusion comes and says, well, hang on a second. Maybe it's compatible to say that when the poor person eats earlier, and when you eat bread on Shabbat evening, because there's no heating facilities and you can't cook on Shabbos, it's the same time as a poor person. And the Gemara is saying, well, then that's a heck of a problem, because at that point, it contradicts the Mishnah, because it's now giving a different time for the first brisa and a second brisa against the sages. So what do we do with the sages? So it says, no, let's hold our opinion where it doesn't necessarily mean a poor person eats at the time when people eat their meal on Shabbat, people eat their bread on Shabbat. It could still be a poor person is the same time as a Kohen, but Rabbi Meir turns around and says, when we are eligible to say Shema is when the people eat their bread on Shabbat. So the outlying opinion is Rabbi Meir, but it doesn't mean that we have to change our opinion in the Mishnah, because the goal of the Mishnah is not to really be altered unless it absolutely has to. So therefore, concurrent with the sage's opinion in the Mishnah, and the second brisa works, and concurrent with the first brisa, it's not necessarily in disagreement, because we don't have evidence, as Gavin said, for or against. The only evidence we have against is Rabbi Meir in the second brisa against the sages. You see where we're holding so far, and you see how it brings the time of the Kohanim. And then in the second brisa, when it says the time of the Kohanim is the time when there's the appearance of the three stars. The Mishnah and when the Kohanim are entitled to eat their teruma is one and the same. It just doesn't mention in the Mishnah the three stars, because it's implicitly known when the three stars come out is when the Kohanim are entitled to eat their teruma. And we learn that from the Brisa, but it's implicit in the Mishnah. What the Mishnah could have said, the Gemara said, is when three small stars come out, then you can do Shema. But we wouldn't have learned that rule of the Kohen. And you saying, Lance, which you haven't said, but I think a better question is, well, why do you have to learn for that rule from the Mishnah when you can learn it from the second brisa? If it's turning around in the second brisa and saying that, this is my question on the Gemara, is that if why you don't need it from the Mishnah. You're learning in the Mishnah is when the Kohanim are entitled to eat the teruma, and it says when with the appearance of the stars. Why mention the Kohanim again in the Mishnah? Because we've already learned that lesson. Why would the Gemara bring it as a point to go on a tangent? That's my question with the Gemara. What's your question?
Not a question, just something to note is that it seems before they had mentioned that why they mention the Kohanim now, where it seems that like they're adding nothing, but now it seems that it's quite critical that they should mention the Kohanim, because it's only there that we learned about the three stars.
Yeah, but that's what the Gemara basically mentions, is that if people, you see, in those days they didn't have access to everything we've got now. You had traditions, so some of the Rishonim had access to certain commentaries and some did not. They were spread all over the world. So I think what the Mishnah was there was to teach us about the Kohanim, because had it just mentioned about the appearance of the three stars, we wouldn't have put two and two together unless we had the second brisa, which taught us that lesson of the Mishnah. So far, the only thing outstanding that doesn't work is this opinion of Rabbi Meir that says the time we start Shema is when people eat their bread on Shabbat evening. That's the problem. But as far as the poor are concerned, it could contradict, it could be a complementary or compatible. We don't know yet. And the reason you can't know from the first brisa is there's no contradicting opinion within that first brisa. So we don't know. We're going to have to find out. But you see, Gavin, the argument so far.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. The second brisa.
I did say.
The second brisa with Rabbi Meir seems to be superfluous because it's not bringing anything new.
No, it's not superfluous, because Rabbi Meir was a Tana, and if he turns around and says there's a different time to say Shema, it's a worry. it is a bit of a worry. He wasn't a small league. Okay, he didn't agree with the sages. It wasn't superfluous. It was a contradicting opinion. But that contradicting opinion is what's the issue. Because
How do we know it's contradicting? Is it because Shabbos starts when 3 starts? It means that supper has to be later. How do we know it's contradictory at this stage? How do we know it's not in agreement?
Okay, I'll tell you.
Because you said, because you told us yesterday, because there's two arguments in the second brisa. You wouldn't have two opinions that unless they were opposite.
Correct. So in other words, the opinion of the sages, if it was the same as Rabbi Meir, there'd be no need to reiterate another sage.
So it has to be a different time. It has to be a different time.
And the Gemara says, learn from this that the time stated in regard to a poor person is a time to itself, and the time stated in regard to a Kohen is a time to itself. Maybe that's what we learn. The Gemara is asking a question. It's not making a statement. It's saying, hang on a second. It seems to be a bit of a contradiction because so far what we're having is, okay, the time that the poor person does the Shema, when he enters to eat his home, when he enters his home to eat, and then when the 3 stars come out, when Kohanim are entitled to eat the teruma, could be the same time, it could be different. We also can correlate with logic that it seems that people eat earlier on Shabbat evenings, and because they're not allowed to halachically cook, and during the week, poor people don't have the capacity to buy expensive meats to cook, nor the fuel to cook it. So it seems that on a logical basis that it could be, just logic-wise, that a poor person, time to do Shema and the time that we do it weekday, if they're both having their meals earlier, if the people eat Shabbos meals earlier than weekday because they can't cook their food, and poor people eat earlier than most people, those times could correlate by logic. But we're saying then there's a problem, because you can't have a poor person having the same Shema time as a people on Shabbat and the Kohanim, because the second brisa says, look, there's 2 opinions. When people enter to eat their bread on Shabbos Eve, that's Rabbi Meir, and the sages say when the Kohanim are entitled to eat the teruma. So the 3 times cannot be the same. So the Gemara wants to first propose, and it's asking a question. So it says, well, look, maybe it's more logical to turn around and say, people eat early on a Shabbat because they're not halachically allowed to reheat their food. And poor people eat earlier than normal people during the week because they can't afford expensive meats that take hours to cook nor the fuel. And they maybe can't even afford to have nighttime illumination. So those are similar. So does it mean, if they're similar, that a Kohen is a time to itself and a poor person is a time to itself? The Gemara is asking a question. Now the Gemara says no. The time given in regard to a poor person and the time given in regard to a Kohen are the same time. It's more likely to say that based on the evidence. Whereas the time given in regard to a poor person and the time given in regard to all people on Shabbat Eve are not the same. Okay. In other words, if you have a look here, when poor people eat during the week, okay, and when Kohanim who were Tameh may enter to eat teruma are identical. However, if you just look at an evidence point of view, however, if you look at Rabbi Meir's opinion, when people enter to eat on Shabbat Eve, and he's saying that's the opinion when people may start their Shema, that contradicts the rabbinical opinions in both the sages in both the second brisa as well as the Mishnah. The first brisa doesn't contradict or correlate with anybody. It's an opinion on its own. So we say, where does that opinion gravitate towards? And it says, logically, we might have thought it was closer to the time when people eat on Shabbat. And we're saying, no, it probably isn't, because it doesn't mean, it hasn't been disproven yet that it's the same time as the Kohen. We're still in the same position of clarity. Do you get that, Lance? We don't know. That's all I want you to get to at this stage before we bring the third brisa. There's no evidence either way when a poor person eats, time-wise. And therefore, if we say that's the time to mark when we do Shema, we don't know what time that is. There's no conclusive proof either way. We can't go on just assumptions. So what we do is we bring the third brisa and see if we can have some clarity. But I can only bring the third brisa if you understand where we're holding now. Can anybody tell me where we're holding now? I know where we're holding. Lance,
We're
tell
holding
me.
it where you ended off.
Clever. Lance? You had a long day. All right, in one sentence, is that
I can tell you.
tell me.
Well, I'm always told you last time is that the first Mishnah holds that they correlate that the starting of the Shema is not when there's no mention of the 3 stars, so they use the correlation of the Kohanim, their starting time when they can eat truma, right? So they go to the mikveh, they can have truma.
Yeah.
That and then I can't remember if that's from another brasa where you get it from, but there's something. I don't think it's from any of these brasas, but there's another link where it says that that's 3 stars. So that's how we bring the 3 stars in. Then I think the second brasa mentions about the 3 stars. That's being the earliest time. And then it talks also about what's it called? A poor person generally starts.
No. It's gone all muddled. Okay, I'll give it in one sentence. Okay. The Mishnah.
I might have the wrong brasas.
It's okay.
But I think my facts are more or less right though.
Listen, I know you know, but you and Lance have had a long day. So listen.
I'm terrible with names, and I'm not going to remember which brass is which.
No, it's very simple. It's very, very simple. So Mishnah says one thing: when the Kohanim are entitled to eat their teruma, that is the earliest time for Shema, and it's inferred when the stars come out. We know that. How do we know that? In tradition from the second brisa that's brought. In the second brisa that's brought, that the sages turn around and say that when the Kohanim are entitled to eat the teruma, when 3 stars come out. And it brings that pasuk. Okay? And it said that's a normal halachic working day. That's fine. There's a contradicting opinion in the second brasa where Rabbi Meir says the time that people eat their bread on Shabbat Eve is the earliest time during the week they can say Shema. That contradicts the Mishnah and the second brisa. Contradicts the sages. We don't know what to do with the first brisa. And all the first brisa says, there's no other opinion, is when the poor person enters his home to eat his meal, his evening meal. So, we are stuck.
Okay, I can give it over now.
Sorry?
I can give it over now.
Perfect. I know you can. No, I know you can. So the thing.
All right, you didn't.
Yeah.
I got mixed up between the first and second. It's
No,
fine.
I know that.
But I know the content. All right, good.
So the only question we have now is what to do with the poor person. Because logic would turn around to us and say to us, it's probably more likely it would agree with Rabbi Meir, just simply because a poor person would start earlier, in a way, as he doesn't have expensive meats that take hours to cook, because basically bread and salt, his meal's quick. And he also so he doesn't have the fuel to cook the meat. He doesn't have the money to cook the meat. And his meal is simple and can be prepared. So it's obviously eligible to eat that meal way before anybody else does, because spends a lot of time cooking. And if he doesn't have the money for fuel, it's unlikely he would eat in the dark with candles. So far that seems like an earlier time, and it would seem to correlate more with the earlier time of Rabbi Meir, who says when they break bread on Shabbos is when we say the weekday Shema. And the Gemara says, well, that can't be, we know from the second brisa, it cannot be the same. We know that one of the times are out. And the only evidence we have is in the second brisa, where there's an opinion that contradicts the sages. Evidentially, that's the only timeline we have, because it's mentioned as another opinion, which means they don't agree. So we say we need to know what to do with the poor person. Does it fit in terms of the time of the Kohanim, eligible eating to the Teruma, or the time that normal people eat their bread on Shabbat? And we're saying, look, you could say logically it would seem to agree with Shabbat, but we've got no evidence either way yet. There's nothing about it other than an assumption that would make us go in one direction or another. That's what the Gemara is saying. We need more information as far as a poor person is concerned. That's the issue. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got 6 minutes left. I just want to go through some other concepts. Now we're learning a third brisa. Now the third brisa sounds a little similar, but it is different. It says, when may we begin to recite the Shema in evenings? When the day becomes sanctified on Shabbat Eve. Now, from the time the day becomes sanctified on Shabbat Eve, these are the words of Rav Eliezer. Rav Yeshua says, from the time Kohanim or Tameh become tahor, to the extent of being able to eat their teruma. Okay? So if you have a look here, firstly, if you look on the third brisa, Rav Yeshua agrees with the sages. There's no dispute. He's agreeing. Only when the Kohanim are tahor from their mikvah and they're able to eat the teruma when the 3 stars come out. Rabbi Yeshua goes with the sage. Rabbi Eliezer sounds like he's going with Rabbi Meir, but the words are different. Because Rabbi Meir turns around and says when people are eligible to eat their bread on Shabbat Eve, and Rav Eliezer is saying basically from the time the day becomes sanctified on Shabbat Eve. Those are 2 separate times. Lance, which do you think is the earlier time? Rabbi Meir, Rav Eliezer? Lance, you frozen? Lance?
I lost I didn't hear you the last 30 seconds. You
Okay,
just like
no
froze.
problem. No problem. So Rav Yeshua agrees with the sages. He said from the time Kohanim who are tamei become tahor to the extent of being able to eat the teruma, when the stars come out, it doesn't mention that, but it's implicit that he agrees with the sages. The opinion before that in the third brisa was Rav Eliezer, who says from the time the day becomes sanctified on Shabbat Eve. Now, it sounds like Rabbi Meir, because he's talking about Shabbat Eve, but Rabbi Meir is talking about the time when people eat their bread on Shabbat Eve. Now, when you eat your bread is later than when it becomes halachic Shabbat, when the day becomes holy, because Banash Mashot is that twilight period. And people, as Lance said, do not eat that early. They still got to go to shul. When they eat their bread later. So Rav Eliezer is later than Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is later than Rabbi Eliezer.
There's an opinion that Shabbat comes in once you sanctify it, and you sanctify it by drinking the Kiddush, the Shabbat, the Kiddush, by having the wine. So that's when you're having a meal, when you're having the wine, which means the second and the third are identical.
Yes, so those that hold that opinion would hold by Rabbi Meir. Because Rabbi Meir says when you do Kiddush and bread, which would be the same time as one act, we don't even have an interruption between Kiddush, Vasing. There's no hefsek, and the meal. That agrees with Rabbi Meir. Rav Eliezer says the earliest time to do Shema during the week is when the day becomes holy. In other words, it's twilight and you don't know if it's Shabbat yet or not, but it still looks like it's day, which is a much earlier time. And when do we bring in Shabbat, guys? Generally when it's that twilight Banash Mashot. But what is the point here? The point of it here is not when we eat or when Shabbos comes in. It's when we do the Shema on weekday. So in a timeline, so far we have Rav Eliezer. Then we have Rabbi Meir, and then we have the sages. So we don't know where Rabbi Meir is, but we assume he's before when the 3 stars come out, because he implies that people eat early on a weekday. It seems to be implied like that. And the poor person, we don't know where they're holding. Okay, so far that makes sense. Now, Rabbi Meir's got a different opinion in the third brisa, just to add confusion. This is where it starts to get tricky. Now, the third brisa says, he said, from the time Kohanim who are Tamei immerse themselves to be able to eat their teruma that night. Now, Alonso is going to have a question, and he's going to agree with Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Meir, but Kohanim must immerse themselves while it's still day, when people don't yet go to sleep. And you've got the word of b'shachbacha, meaning as you lie down. How can you fulfill the obligation to recite the evening Shema at that time when it's not dark yet? When we're not talking Shabbos time, we're talking like when it's still daylight, where the Kohanim must immerse themselves. That must be before the sun sets. That's the question that Rav Yehuda has on Rabbi Meir, and it's in Nida 53a. Guys, do you understand the question?
Yeah, that's a hectic one.
But do you understand how it seems right? He's right.
Well,
He's saying, listen, when do the Kohanim immerse themselves? Technically during the day, before nightfall. So if they immerse themselves during the day, what do you mean it's nighttime? It's not nighttime. If they already immerse themselves at night, they have to wait until the next day before they can partake of any teruma. The only reason they can partake at night is if they immerse themselves in that day before it became night. So what do you mean that's the time to do evening Shema?
You're not allowed to do it that time.
Yeah. So he was saying he doesn't understand Rabbi Meir's opinion.
Yeah,
that's his question too. Okay. Now you've got this Rabbi Meir's opinion here, which is different time, it seems, to Rabbi Meir's opinion before, when most